Excellent. So welcome everyone to the Curriculum Subcommittee meeting of the Brookline School Committee. It is October 18th. The first item on our agenda is to review and approve the minutes from the September 20th meeting. Oh, welcome. Stephen is here as well. This is great. So I hope everyone has had an opportunity to review them. Is there anyone who would like to move the minutes? I see Stephen. Suzanne, is that a second as well? Okay, great. And we need to take a roll call vote because we're remote. Helen?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much. The next item on our agenda is an exciting change from the last few years. We're going to be reviewing an application for international travel. And I believe Rachel Io is here as well. Actually, before we all start, could we all go around and introduce ourselves? So for members of the community who may be joining us or watching and are not familiar with our roles, I will start. I'm Jennifer Monopoly. I'm a member of the school committee and chair of the curriculum subcommittee. Maybe Helen, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Helen Charlupsky. I'm a member of the school committee and have been a member of the curriculum subcommittee forever. It's my favorite.
Oh, sorry. Great. Thank you. Suzanne?
Yeah, hi, I'm Suzanne Fettersfield Moss on the school committee and I'm a member of this subcommittee, curriculum subcommittee.
Stephen?
Hi, my name is Stephen Ehrenberg. I'm on the school committee. This is my first full term.
And then maybe Leslie and then Michelle and Rachel, if you could introduce yourselves as well.
Sure. I'm Leslie Ryan Miller, Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning.
Hi, I'm Michelle Herman, and I'm the Senior Director for Pre-K to 8 Teaching and Learning. Hi, I'm Rachel Io, World Language Curriculum Coordinator at Brookline High School.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I would like to move on to our second agenda item, which is the international trip. So I'm not sure, if whether Leslie, you want to start off or if Rachel's just going to jump right in.
Sure. So I think it makes sense for Rachel to jump in because she can give the most accurate picture of the trip. We do have the application and we're prepared to sign off on it. It looks like a great trip for our students. Like it'll be a great experience and there are many ways it's connected to their learning in Latin and world language. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited to introduce to you our Latin trip to Italy. It's been quite a number of years since we've been able to have conversations about international travel due to the pandemic. And so the World Language Department is particularly excited to begin exploring international travel again in this school year. So we're thankful to the school committee for allowing us to talk a little bit about the Latin trip this year. We are hoping to bring 24 students to Italy in April, between April 13th and 22nd. And the program is really designed for our students in the Latin program at Brookline High. Our Latin 1 course is really takes place, and all the content of that course really takes place in Pompeii, which is one of the major cities that our students will be visiting with a guide to really start to understand and explore all the different sites, historical sites, and the connection to the curriculum that they're exploring in Latin 1. And then obviously, all of the time that they spend in Rome is infused throughout our Latin curriculum and all of the major sites in Rome that they'll be exploring, whether it's the Colosseum or Piazza Venezio or the Vatican. All of those things will be things that students are exploring as part of the Latin curriculum. And they will be doing, looking at the catacombs in Rome, and then also getting an opportunity to visit Vesuvius. All of these things are connected to curriculum that sort of happens either in Latin 4 and 5 later on in our AP course or in our publishing course, or and certainly in Latin 1 with a major focus on Pompeii. And then students are have opportunities to do obviously some major sightseeing, but also some hands-on experiences as well. And they we made sure particularly that this year that the program was very well staffed due to issues of COVID and the uncertainty of navigating international travel. in our new COVID world. And so we have a team of 4 teachers with 24 students. And we also have a 5th adult as part of the travel company who is organizing the trip with Brookline High. So there's 5 adults for 24 students. And this really helps prevent circumstances where if a chaperone or a student, has any kind of issues with COVID, that there's, the opportunity for an adult to be with a student in quarantine, or, have the possibility of needing to stay behind with a student in order to navigate any kind of COVID regulations that are in place. Should anybody fall ill. And this is an unusually high ratio of teachers to students. So we're trying to be particularly cautious this year. The other thing that we have in place that has differed in years past is making sure that every student has travel insurance as part of the required experience. And so there's sort of a basic travel experience, travel insurance policy, and then there's a cancel for any reason type of policy. And so there's different levels of money that a student could receive back if they do need to cancel before the trip actually leaves Brookline, or if school committee deems that they can't travel for any reason. I'm happy to take any particular questions that you have about the trip or concerns.
Suzanne?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Just Rachel, could you just remind me of the opportunities for either subsidized or scholarship money to help students who may need that, or how the funding comes about for the trip?
So funding for the trip is primarily done through, students pay for as much as they can. And obviously we are particularly sensitive to students who need any kind of financial aid. The district has the application process where students will fill out district financial aid application, and then that goes to the finance office, and they determine the percentage that students would receive of financial aid. And then the team of students and teachers work together to raise the money for the students with financial aid. And so it's because it's and I guess it's an optional, an opt-in kind of educational experience. There is sort of no district funding that is given to our international travel.
So when you say the financial aid office, who is that? Is that?
The financial aid office, but the superintendent's office of finance, the finance office.
Oh, okay.
Finance, yeah.
Submit the application to them, and they look at all of the financial forms like students do for any kind of K through 8 field trip, or any kind of band orchestra kind of funding, anything in which a student needs any kind of financial aid.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Helen?
First of all, I want to tell you, thank you. I'm really glad kids are going to be getting this experience. My son actually went to Italy with the art classes when Asna Sens used to do it, and those were fantastic. He was not an art major, he was not interested in art, but he enjoyed it even and learned from that. That being said, how much is the cost of this trip? I don't think I heard that, or did you say it?
The total cost of the trip is around $4,286. And so we have asked,
Wow.
to have, the cost of everything has gone up.
Oh, I'm aware of that. That's why I was asking for the cost. Yeah.
It's really been challenging. And, the reality is when you use a travel company to help navigate the travel with you, who have really strong COVID policies in place and really good protection for our students and for our staff, the cost is slightly higher, and that's the downside of using a travel company. But the upside in this case, I think, really outweighs the downside, given that it's our first international travel, during the pandemic. And so we strongly encouraged our team of teachers to look into a variety of different companies, and they did a lot of shopping around. And this was the most affordable and the company that provided the most amount of flexibility for us to create a program that really suits our students.
I must say, I'm a little concerned about the cost and the accessibility for students. Not a little, quite a bit. And I'm wondering if there's, how much there's actually going to be work on doing fundraising and things like that.
Yeah, it's always a concern for every group of teachers who organizes international travel. I've taken 8 or 9 trips to Japan in my time as a Japanese teacher, and our trips typically run around $4,000. It's incredibly challenging to fundraise for. We've had years where we've had to fundraise up to $13,000. It's nearly impossible. It's really a second full-time job in order to do that.
Sure.
And that is a major ask of our teachers and of the students who participate in the program in order to find ways to make this equitably accessible to all the students who are interested. And yet everybody is really committed to doing that.
Mhm.
And I think, that's perhaps a conversation that, we can, continue around sort of how do we make these experiences as equitably accessible as possible. Because we really want to encourage students from all different backgrounds to be able to have these opportunities. And the costs, do at a certain point a little bit prohibitive.
One suggestion also, make sure any students who are thinking of going to get passports now, because it takes an incredible long time to get passports. So.
Yeah, and we typically help students with that process as well. If they don't have their own passports, help them navigate. For some families, that is their first time getting a passport.
Sure.
For their child.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from the subcommittee? I believe the next steps for this are one approval through the district, but also I think it needs to go to full school committee. So this will also come to full school committee as well. Is that your understanding as well, Leslie? Next step.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, a lot of my questions were answered. Again, I'm really excited about being able to begin some of our travel for our students internationally is really exciting. And I'm really glad that we've got travel insurance, sort of sorted out, because I think that's going to be really important as we navigate sort of the unknown future of international travel. And again, for the fundraising piece, how we can really be really thoughtful about, even if we have to, so it sounds like there's fundraising that needs to happen for students who are need financial assistance according to our financial assistance policy. But if there is, depending on what that number is, a way to fundraise to help all students, I think, to Helen's point, to reduce the overall cost, to make it more accessible, more within reach for families who may not qualify for financial assistance, but also that number is a lot. So, go ahead, Helen.
I'm sorry, because you said it, so is the insurance included in that cost, or is that extra?
Yeah,
It is.
that's very important.
Okay, great.
All right, I think
Office of Teaching and Learning can work with Rachel. When the kids are identified who are attending, we can work closely with Kiana Price, who works in admin and finance, and she's the lead on financial assistance.
Great.
Have a great.
well, thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us and giving us an update. If we don't have any other questions, I think we'll move on to our next agenda item, trying to keep us on track. Thank
Just
you.
to- I'm
Go ahead.
sorry. So are we going to make a recommendation to the full school committee, or is it just going to come, does she have to come again, poor Rachel, and do this over?
Well, I don't know if other committee members, I have 2 thoughts. One, I'm happy for us to make a recommendation if the committee feels comfortable doing so. That would be great. I think it's helpful also for members of the full committee to know that we've had a conversation. They may have other questions they want to ask. We may be able to answer them, but we may not. So I'll leave that up to Leslie and Rachel about, whether it's like an on-call if we need it, or if we want a formal presentation to the full committee. They could talk with Dr. Guillory and the chair and see how they want to do that. But if we're comfortable, Helen, would you like to, is someone suggesting they would like to make a motion?
I'm happy to move it. I'm happy to move support from the subcommittee.
Okay, great. I'm happy to second it. If we're comfortable, then we'll take a vote and we can move it to full school committee. Stephen?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes, and just a reminder, usually these are consent agendas, the trips that we've been doing, not international, are usually the So it's fairly easy.
Yeah, I think if it goes on the consent agenda. So your vote was yes, Suzanne?
Yes.
Right?
Mhm.
And I also vote yes. So Robin, if you would, and I will also reach out and just let the chair know that we have an item that will need to go to full committee. Helen, did you have another question?
Yeah, just two things. I'm sorry. One, I do think it's always good to have Rachel there. I meant that she didn't have to go through the whole presentation again, that because we'd have the written documentation already for what you filled out. And we probably should do it as soon as possible so they can start, even if we could, I don't know if it's possible to get it on the agenda for this week, but if not, definitely for the following week.
Yeah, I agree. I think the sooner that the official approval can, assuming that it is granted and the committee, agrees with the subcommittee, the sooner that we can get this into families' hands so that people can start to make a plan, students can start to consider applications and
They may
selection.
even get jobs, a part-time job to help support some of this.
Yeah. So I think that'll be really helpful, especially with the time, I think one, identifying students, and then obviously application, seeing who has passports and fundraising and all of that will need to be done, soon. So I think that, I think it'll probably, I don't know if there's room. We'll forward a message and see if it can be done this week. If not, maybe next week on the consent agenda. So we'll try to move that. I have a note to take care of that after this meeting. I will forward a message.
And just, I'm sorry, I keep on interrupting, but just as a FYI, it's probably because of the higher costs of these trips. I remember Mexico trips around 2,000 or something like that. I think, the more time, that you can give and we can give to families, the better off everybody is to try and make sure that they can afford to go.
Absolutely, we agree. We only found out in June that that school committee was allowing international travel again. And so teachers worked a little bit over the summer on the application and then really focused on it in September.
Sure.
To get the application ready for an October presentation. So, given the ongoing changing nature of COVID, right, as sort of the conversations have changed from February to, to March to June. So we were sort of on hold until we had more clarity from school committee, but it's great that we, now have this opportunity. And I would imagine that this will just be the beginning of the applications that will come from other parts of my department for next year as well. So those we can definitely, plan on, providing access to those earlier so that, teachers can plan earlier and then also families can plan earlier for the financial costs.
Great.
All right.
Rachel, can I ask you a clarifying question now that you're talking? Do you anticipate any other applications for this school year?
Not from the World Language Department. I don't expect any other.
Okay.
We do expect for the next school year that our French exchange will restart. We'll be hosting in October and then traveling hopefully to France. Our Japan exchange will start again. And I know our Spanish team is looking at a variety of different options. We have currently 2 different trips that have run to Spain and to Costa Rica on alternating years. We've historically had trips to Mexico as well. And the China exchange program, as you know, is a much larger endeavor and a much more complicated process to navigate. And obviously our students in our Chinese program are very anxious to try and return to China. And that is, a little bit dependent on the COVID policy there. So, and sort of the immigration policy there. So we're excited to sort of, restart all of these opportunities for students. But really, we think Italy is going to be the only opportunity for students this school year.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Jen, there is a pending application for actually another trip to Italy, but it's not through the World Language Department. It's through the Culinary Department. That application still needed some work, and so Anthony and I are working on that before before we can present it to you.
Okay.
Is it for the same time period?
It's around the same time. It might be a little bit later than this trip, I believe.
I'm sure
but
they're
I
going to
don't
use
have
the
that
vacation
application in
week.
front of me.
I imagine they're going to use the vacation week. That's what you're doing, right? Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, then we'll look forward to other applications. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today.
Great. If one of you could just let me know if we end up on the docket for Thursday this week or next week, that would be helpful. And if you need me to attend, that would be super helpful. All right,
Yep,
so Thank
absolutely.
you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, we're going to move on to our next item, review of FY 21-22 MCAS tests and trends. Are we ready for that presentation?
We are ready. Let me
Not-
just share my screen.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and also, Gabe, would you you've joined our meeting at the beginning, we did introductions. Would you just take a second to introduce yourself as well before we get farther into the meeting?
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm Gabe McCormick, Senior Director of Teaching and Learning for Secondary Education.
Thank you so much. That's great.
Okay, are you guys seeing curriculum subcommittee presentation? Okay.
Yeah.
You never know when you're sharing your screen, what's, so, okay, we got it. So I will just kick this off. We've had a lot of conversations here in OTL about the results. We just got them not too long ago. They were unembargoed maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, not too long. There have also been a number of calls with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which we've attended, as there really are some intricacies to this test, both the way the test is structured, as well as just the findings from the test. And so, what we'd like to do today is just walk through some of the celebrations, some of the areas for growth, some of the forward thinking we're doing around ways to continuously improve the academic learning of our children. One thing I just want to say from the beginning is that we know that MCAS is just one measure of what a student can do. That being said, it is a measure. And so we add this to our data tool belt as one of the pieces of data that we look at when we're looking at the places where the district is doing well and places, again, that we want to think more about and we're hoping to grow. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. Michelle and Gabe are going to do the bulk of the presentation, and I will jump in at points and let me know, Michelle and Gabe, when you need me to change the slide.
Great. And can you hear us? Because I noticed with Rachel and a couple of the members, it was sounded like it was underwater. So great. So our agenda for today is to look at our 21-22 MCAS results and highlight areas of celebrations and areas of challenge for us. We also want to be really clear that we've considered our outline for next steps, and all of those will be aligned to our current district goals. So we want to make sure that this isn't something extra or stands out. And then, as Leslie said, this is the one assessment that we can look at ourselves against other students in the state. And so it really is valuable for us to use this for certain purposes, and it's not the end all be all for everything. And that, again, we collect multiple other pieces of data to look at students, including the attendance and SEL data. So we'll continue to think about that as we move through today's presentation. So let's look at the next slide. So one of the caveats that the state gave, and I think this is a really good thing for us to think about, is that this is going to be a new baseline for us. The 2019 assessment was the last full administration we took at grades 3 through 8 and 10. The calculation of many of the MCAS norms need 3 years of data. Without having a consistent 3 years of data, since only partial assessments were administered during the other years, it's not good to totally look back at that and use that as a jumping off point to do comparisons that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at where do we compare from 2019 and think of today as our baseline and our starting point going forward. We also want to highlight that in grade 10, there was a full test administered this year, but in several areas, it's the next generation test. Therefore, there isn't even possible to compare the data between this year and other years. And we'll talk a little more about that as we go through the presentation. let's look at the next slide. So a lot of this is the statewide summary. However, we've highlighted some places where Brookline is right in line with the statewide summary. And so we want to make sure that we show you where we're alike and where we're not. So math scores increased. So when they're talking about math scores increasing, that's between 2019, 2021, and 2022 across the state. English and language arts scores declined, and the science scores increased slightly. So our trends were a little bit mixed here, and we'll look at those specifically. So when they talk about math scores increasing, they are talking between 2019 and 2022. We have a little bit of an increase, not an enormous increase, and we'll look at that again as well. We did have some declining in ELA, and then our science scores are pretty flat. So we're going to take a look at those specifically as we walk through. However, what we did find is that the two areas for ELA focus area for improvement about writing and early literacy challenges. So we'll talk in more depth. What we did find in Brookline is in grades basically 3 through 10, writing was a challenge. And the reason that we also highlighted the literacy piece is not necessarily about reading performance. However, the writing challenges that we see are specific to responding to reading through writing. And so you'll be able to see this break down a little bit more as we move along. And then finally, absenteeism. So I actually was surprised when I saw the level of absenteeism between the 1920 school year, the 21-22 school year. It was astounding, and it's across the state. And when you see the numbers across the state, you'll see why we're in line with it, and that we're working on all of these things, and we'll outline our next steps for them as we move through.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just add, so
Sure.
I actually just got off of a DESE call, and the commissioner was referring again to MCAS scores. These two trends that Michelle just pointed out around absenteeism and around the early literacy challenges, specifically writing, those are common across the state. And so DESE is actually going to be putting several grant opportunities into place, as well as they have several interventions that they are sponsoring that they want districts to consider. So Commissioner Riley is going to be back in touch with us soon, but he did let all of the districts in the Commonwealth know today that that is really DESE's area of focus, because they see that this is a trend again across the Commonwealth.
Good timing for that call.
Right?
Yeah, great timing for that call. So we have some celebrations, and we're going to start there. So I know that the term learning loss gets under people's skin, but I want to make sure that we recognize that that's actually a DESE term, and they are defining learning loss as a decline in MCAS. So as we're talking today, we're using that specifically as the DESE term, not because we believe that learning loss is a good term to use. Yeah.
Just to jump in really quickly, something you'll see a bit of a pattern across a number of the slides is that we've mirrored some of the slides DESE created for the statewide data so that we can really clearly compare apples to apples without rebuilding the entire structure.
Oh, yes, thank you. So DESE focused mainly when they presented to us on race as a way to do comparisons. So we have done the same. We've added a few, but thank you, Gabe, because that will make this clearer. So our students didn't demonstrate the same level of learning loss at the state. Our performance was actually, and we're going to continue to compare basically from the 2019 year to the 2022 year. It is not useful to use 21 because it wasn't a full assessment and didn't get at all the same skills. Our students, our data basically shows that we're kind of flat, and that's great for us because many other districts throughout the state had significant drops, and we'll be able to show that to you. It means that our students held their own through the pandemic. Our overall performance in ELA, math, science we were made similar to our pre-pandemic performance. So places where we were above the state are still similar, very similar, and places where we performed really well. Our aggregate group outperformed the state. So our group as a whole, we consistently outperformed the state. And then this was something that the state did not experience. Our grade 7 showed increases in performance in ELA and math. So that's key. We had for some reason, we had growth there. And so that's something we want to look at. If we go to the next slide.
Yep, and we actually
sorry.
had one of our K-8s was actually #1 in the state for their performance in 7th grade ELA. So that is certainly notable.
Yeah, Helen, did you? I think you're on mute.
I don't know if you want questions now, but just a quick one. Our math new curriculum, when did that begin?
So that began 2 years ago. So our 5th graders, so we want to look, that would mean look at 5th grade, but we have to keep in mind that the first year of implementation was during the pandemic. And so
but those 5th graders were 7th graders then.
no, our 3rd graders, our first 3rd graders to go through the new math program. So it was 3, 4, sorry,
We had a middle school.
the middle school program did begin. So our 7th graders, but our 8th graders also had received the new math program in middle school. So all of our middle school students had the new math program, but I will say we can't, I want to be careful that we don't say that the math program, only because we had drops in 7th, 6th grade that were pretty significant and in 8th. So we'll look at that more specifically.
Yeah, we have a whole section on math and
Each
that.
content. Yep.
Kind of come back to that then.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so lots to celebrate. And then we have some challenges. And a lot of these challenges, again, these are not necessarily new, but I think what we can look at now is we've been able to disaggregate this data a little bit more. And we have used these gaps and attendance challenges as a way to build our plan to mitigate these issues. So just high level, our Black and African American students in Brookline demonstrate a lower performance than their peers in the state. So what you're going to see is that in some areas, our Black and African American students had lower performances than the state aggregate. And then the gap for disabilities, the gap for students with disabilities has widened slightly in ELA since 2019. So what is the root cause for that is something that we're digging into. Attendance, as Gabe is going to share with us later, it was a huge challenge last year. And again, like I'll say, I did not realize how big it was until we looked at the comparison from prior years to that one. Now, just so you know, we get a district determination every year. And our district determination is always that we're meeting our benchmarks. Attendance was not counted this year towards the district determination. We were just held over from last year's determination. However, this is going to be relevant for this year's data. So if we don't increase our attendance rates, it will impact our data.
And just as a quick expansion on that, because it'll come back later, no district determinations were changed based on last year's data. So that's a statewide thing. And so even districts found to be in need are still in need. And the state is working with those districts on a plan because some of them may have shown improvement, but they officially haven't changed designation yet. So that whole designation thing is statewide.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, did you have a question?
Yeah, so a quick question. So we've known for a while that the gap between Black and white students' achievement on MCAS there's been a large gap, and when I looked at the Stanford Educational Opportunity Project, their data on trend lines only go through 2018. So I'm wondering if the lower performance that you're catching here, do you have a sense of the trend since 2018 covering the COVID years?
Yeah, so
I know Erin is gone, so we don't really
No,
right?
we
I'm not asking you for your statistical evaluation of that
have a little.
trend line, but do you have any sense of where we're going?
Yeah, I do, because what we're going to show you in a little while is our gaps between performance in 2019 and 2022, and the distance of Black and African American students next to our white students specifically. So you'll be able to see where the trend is.
Over what period is this what I'm asking?
This
Is
is
it
just going to be over 2019, which is just over since 2018, basically.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you, Michelle.
since
Thank you.
2018. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
And I will tell you that the gap for students with disabilities, we have some more digging that we have to do there, and we'll be able to just talk to you. We don't have that specific piece to give you, but I'll create the slide. Some of this means, like you said, Aaron's not here, so some of this means I was doing it and I don't know the most efficient way. I know the how. So I will get back.
What you're saying is exactly the piece of information that I think
Right.
would be most important for us to dig into right now, is to know
Okay.
whether, despite the pandemic, we have managed to close the gap or whether it's continued to widen.
And I think in general for everyone, we're going to have a lot of detail coming up. So if you have detailed questions, let's try to hold them.
Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Jennifer, do you have a question you want to throw in, and then we'll get into?
It was an attendance question. It's actually more just of a definition. So when we're talking about attendance, we're talking school year attendance, not attendance as in the number of kids taking the MCAS.
Correct. That's not participation rate. We actually, the ironic thing is our participation rate went up this year since even pre-pandemic. So no rhyme or reason.
Yeah, this is attendance is kids showing up to school.
Yep. Good questions. Okay, so we'll move into the data and the specific data, and hopefully we'll start to answer these questions, and hopefully we're able to make this as clear as possible. So we're going to start with ELA, and we're going to start with aggregate data and then move down towards more specific data. So this is aggregate state data. And I highlighted 4 grades because those are grades that we saw significant dips. And at the state level, you'll see that in general, most of the drops between 2019 and 2022 were in the double digits. I will tell you this, that I'll just repeat that we're looking at 19 to 22 because there was no test in 20, and the 21 test had half the date, like is not comparable to either the 19 year or the 22 year. So this is on the state's recommendation, and that's why we are calling this year our baseline, our place to start. So these are, yeah.
And then in addition to that, just so you know what the numbers are that we're looking at.
Oh, I was about to, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This is a combination of students who met or exceeded expectations on the MCAS, just added together, right? So like grade 3, 2019, 56% of students met or exceeded the MCAS statewide. And then in 2022, 44%. And so we'll use pretty consistently that measure throughout.
Yep. And I will tell you that measure is the reason they combine those two is because when you get to 10th grade, that combination is what is considered passing the MCAS. And so these are actually percentiles. So what it's saying is that 56% of the students in 3rd grade across the state in 2019 met or exceeded expectation. In 2022, 44% met or exceeded. So at the state level, again, if we define the learning loss as the drop, there were some significant drops in ELA because these are percentages. These are not score points. So let's move into how Brookline met this. So if we move into the Brookline part, again, I highlighted the same grade levels. So a couple of things to notice here. We had some single digit drops, which is significantly different than the state because again, it takes a lot of students to score in a particular area to change the percentage in the drop. 8th grade and 6th grade, we have some questions about what's going on. 3rd, 4th, a little bit less. And again, this is the change. And what we'll do is dig into who the students are that are dropping the most. But I will also share this with you. Our meeting and exceeding expectations in 2019 and 2022, those numbers, anything are in the 5 range, that's pretty flat. So in some areas we're holding strong. 10th grade only had a 2% drop. That's huge. 3 through 8 overall only having a 6% drop is also, that's the combination of 3 through 8 together. That's significant because again, compared to the state, and you have these slides with these highlights in order to be able to look at how the state did versus how we did in Brookline. So I'm going to dig a little deeper. I think this side is the one that's most significant. So let me just orient you to the slide. The top box is the state performance. So that's the performance of students in the state in 2019 and 2022 for meeting and exceeding. So African-American students in the state were at 33% meeting and exceeding in 2019, 26% 2022. Now, at the bottom, what you'll see, the very last line is how white students did in the state in 2019 and 2022. Again, we're on ELA. So what we did was we looked at what's the gap during those years at the state level and at the district level for the white students versus, or the African-American students to the white students, the Asian students to the white. So by race, we looked at performance. So in 2019, what you'll see, because the 2019 was the last time they gave a test, the state had a negative 26 percentage points difference for white students and African-American. There was a 13% student increase between white students and Asian students, and a 26% decrease for white students versus Latin. They call it Hispanic, but it's Latinx population. If you look at 22, the state had pretty flat in their gap. So their gap was very flat because students had, similar performance differences between the white students. Now this gap is a little bit off because our white students did decrease their performance. So it's kind of like everybody shifted down. Now let's look at the Brookline picture. So in 2019, 80% of white students in Brookline were meeting and exceeding performance. If you look at 2022, 76%. That's a pretty flat performance in terms of having been in a pandemic for multiple years. However, if now we compare that to the performance of our African-American students, we have a much larger gap than the state does between the performance of African-American students and our white students. In addition, our Asian students are in close range with our white students, and our Hispanic students are also behind, but at the exact same level as the state. So Stephen, I think this is the slide that we wanted to dig into.
This is exactly what I was looking for. Thank you,
Yeah,
Michelle.
yeah, because this gives us, so although as an aggregate group, we did not have the loss that the state had, I would say here we're demonstrating some loss, and that the fact that our gap is behind the state signals to us we have to do some very specific work to understand this and to mitigate it.
And to jump in a little bit, I just want to acknowledge the way this is constructed and presented, right, as a gap versus white students, right? This is the way the state presented it. So again, it allows us to compare apples to apples with the state, even though we do acknowledge that this centers white students as kind of a baseline. These gaps are relatively consistent if you compare to students in aggregate, right? That the numbers don't change a whole lot, just given the sizes of our populations. And I think, again, the key that we can acknowledge is that if our white and Asian students in particular are outperforming the state at such a high level, and our African-American and Black students are theoretically accessing the same curriculum, right, we've got significant work to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's also something that we can use to review, as part of our curriculum review, our schedule reviews. This gives us multiple data points to look at where our students' participating? Where are they getting the access, et cetera? All right, so we're going to move on to the next slide because, whoops, one back.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay. One back. Well, right there. Nope. One more ahead. All right, so this is grade 10. So grade 10, we also, I think there's some things here. Our grade 10 students in 2022, our African-American students performed right at the state level. Whereas in 2019, we were ahead of the state level because a 6 percentage point difference is a significant difference. I think the thing to look at here is that between grades 3 through 8, between that area and here, we have a bigger increase in the gap for our Black and African-American students. Stephen, are you thinking or do you have a question? I see you just sort of taking it in.
I'm
Right,
definitely. I'm sorry. Was my hand up? I'm just taking.
No,
it.
no. I actually was just looking, watching and just checking in. Helen and Suzanne, go ahead. Oh, Helen, you're on mute.
Sorry. One thing I don't think you have, I sort of perused very quickly the slide deck. I would be interested in seeing how many students, not the total, but how many failed and comparing that.
Mhm.
To me, that's a
Are you
real,
looking, so this you can tell the percentage of how many failed if you go the opposite, but you're talking about the N, the number?
well, and the actual, so there's 2 more categories, right? There's needs improvement. There's only 3 or there's
No,
4?
there's 2 more, but at the high school level, in order to say that you've passed the MCAS, we need you to meet and exceed the, right.
I guess I meant more for 3 through 8 rather
I
than.
can send you those graphs. We have them. I can pull them. We can pull those from Edwin.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'll write myself a note. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Suzanne?
I think I'm related to that. So am I understanding that 57% of our African-American students did not pass the MCAS?
Correct.
Correct.
2019 and 2022, 63% did not pass on ELA.
Hold on. I think we're speaking wrong because you actually use all 3 categories for pass at 10th grade.
But the distinction is these are 10th graders only. And so a 10th grader who does not pass the MCAS could have an opportunity in 11th grade to take it again as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that these kids are not graduating, but it does mean they're in danger of not graduating.
No. And their
And
numbers.
do we do something special to help them then
Yeah.
pass? I mean, that's
Yes.
a lot of kids not passing first time around, isn't it?
May not be, it depends on what the N is.
Here's, right. It's
Well,
well,
that's-
our N is big enough. I mean, we have a group of students that we have to pay attention to.
Oh, I agree, but every student is important. I'm not trying to say that.
I think the N of not passing, because I think I misspoke. In order to pass for the high school, you get, it's the top, the 3, they use 3 out of 4 of the categories. But
Our high school is approximately 6% African American and Black, right? Which gives us approximately 120 students total. We're also approximately 11 or 12% Hispanic Latinx, right? Which again, when we're looking at 85, 90% of white and Asian students meeting and exceeding, 70% for our Hispanic students is not great. I'm not excited about that number. And from the work I do at the high school, I know that every department head, as you know, kind of is relevant for the MCAS, and every team is certainly working with students who have not passed in order to make sure they get across. And I think some of that's represented in our graduation rates being as high as they are.
yeah, and I think for us, I'm not right this second even thinking as much about passing rates as what are students leaving the high school with, what knowledge, and the fact that that knowledge is significantly behind our white students. Because I mean, like, I just, that's what stands out for me, is that they leave this would point out that they leave significantly less prepared, whether it's for college or career readiness. And that's sort of the point that I want to drive home for this. So if we move on, because like I said, there are celebrations in this data, but there are some things that have consistently been on our radar, and we need to act upon them.
And one thing
Yeah.
I'll
Oh,
just
sorry,
say-
Leslie.
No, that's okay. One thing that I'll just say that also Desi really emphasized is that the real way to mitigate this and make growth is to have a targeted laser-like focus on the students that are most in need. And so that is really what we're thinking about. We already started thinking about this with the Title I funding. We have a substantial amount of funding that is going to outside of school support, to supporting teachers with professional development that they may need to best support our students. So I think while, this seems glaring, right? I think the silver lining we have is that we can get our arms around this and we can do something about it. And so we all need to be really intentional about that. And we just need to, again, look at it with a laser-like focus. So that's a lot of the thinking, the next step thinking that we have.
And we have description of that towards the end of the presentation too.
So this is just to demonstrate how this, I'm sorry, Suzanne, did we miss a question?
Well, I just, a number that would be helpful to me in putting this in perspective is what percentage of our kids graduate with a high school diploma and in 4 or 5 years, whatever that is.
It's in the high 90s. I can't quote it off the top
That's
of my
what I
head.
thought. Yes. So, I mean, that means that they may not make it the first time they do MCAS, but they certainly do by the second or third time? I mean, is that what we can say from that, or what does that mean?
Yeah, that is what we can say. And some kids, right, particularly kids with disabilities, will do an alternate assessment, right? There are other.
Yeah, there are fewer though. What percentage is that? Do we know? That's probably a small percent, right?
Don't know off the top of my head. And there are other factors involved in graduation in addition to MCAS, right? I think the point that Michelle was making that's really important to me is if 90% of our white and Asians or high 80s of our white and Asian students are meeting and exceeding, even if a student can pass with a partially met, to me, that's not a good enough standard.
Right. Gotcha.
Right. That doesn't mean we're doing our job right. And so MCAS shouldn't be a high bar for us to meet. With the resources we have, with the opportunities we can provide to students, we should be looking at MCAS as a minimum standard for student learning and student performance. And
didn't they just raise the scores?
A little bit,
but not. I don't actually want to get into the weeds, but here's what I'll say. Brookline benefited this year because many of the urban districts scores dropped. And so what they had to do was adjust what was considered meeting and exceeding expectations. And so at 3 through 8, that served Brookline well because our scaled scores stayed very flat. And so we actually had some benefit from it.
In addition to that, before she left, Erin did some very preliminary analysis of what the impact of the new cut scores would be. And she did not predict a significant impact for us in terms of how our categories fall.
Okay. Thank you. We'll have to watch that as we go.
Yes, we do. So I want to move into just this. This is state data. And the reason we're using state data is in order for us to identify. So what we learned in ELA was, let me back up for a moment. In the writing assessment, a score of 0 is given for either completely writing, missing the boat, or for if a student doesn't put anything on the paper. And we have to actually analyze for that. So we need to look at student data and say, who wrote something and it was completely off base and they got a 0, and who didn't write anything at all, because those are different interventions with students. Because there's a reason a student may have put nothing on a paper, but we don't have that data. So it's very hard for us today to be able to give you our scores around that and to look at that. But what we found out was the number of students that did not write, the number of students that did not, that received a 0 increased significantly from 19 and 1920 in 2019 to 31% in 2022.
Yeah,
And
there's
so
a, sorry,
yeah.
there's a typo on the slide. That should be the percentage of test takers receiving the score of 0.
That's why I was like, wait, right. So there was a big increase in students that either scored a 0 or didn't put anything on the paper. And then the average points. So what we noticed in our data, so Gabe and I took the curriculum coordinators through the data, and something we noticed in social studies, in science, math, and ELA was that we lose a lot of points in writing. There's an opportunity to gain many more. So our average, and in order to give you the results here, I would have to do some paper and pencil work, which I'm happy to do, but we don't have all the pieces back yet that I need to do it. Like, for instance, looking at the student papers to see if they wrote anything or not. But what we learned was the number of average points earned dropped for us as well. And what we did, so then we did disaggregate that information. What we found out is our students are actually earning most points in the ability to write a full sentence, to use the conventions of print. Where they are falling down is developing the ideas based on what they read and responding to that reading in writing. So that's like very concrete for us to look at, is how do we develop students' writing in response to their reading? So this is something that we can address pretty easily, and address it using science, social studies, math, and ELA writing. So we weren't going to spend a ton of time on it, but eventually we'll have better data. It's going to take a little time, especially without Erin. So I'll say that. So moving into the next piece is math. So you had some questions about math, so I'm hoping that this will get answered here. So, this is the state, and what the state was saying that was, there was a bigger drop between 19 and 21 than there was from 19 to 22. So the state is calling that a little bit of a recovery. We took that out because it was just, they also tell us not to look at 21. But what you'll see is that, again, there are some double-digit drops in math. Now, again, this is state data from grades 3 through 8, and grade 10 had a bigger drop in math than it did in ELA, and that was statewide as well. But if we look at the district data, which is the next slide, there we go. So if we look at the district data, again, we're almost in line, but we're a little bit ahead of the state. And so this is just our high level data. Our 10th grade performed, again, in terms of the gap, similarly to the state. So again, we didn't have that. So yeah, so let's go on to the next slide, because again, this, go back one more. There we go. Yeah. So this is going to allow us to look at, again, through race. And again, we use that because of the state, the way they structured it for the state data. So again, our white students in the state, had pretty much a 9% drop between 19 and 20. But looking at their gap with their white students, their African Americans, let me try again. Sorry, this is what happens at the end of the day when I'm talking numbers. African American students had about a 10% drop in performance. But what you'll notice is that at the state level, the gap between white students and African American students between 2019 and 2022 stayed about the same. It was a flat piece. And they actually decreased the gap between Hispanic students and white students in 2022. So where did we wind up? So our performance in math in 2019 for our African American students was the same as their peers. We have had an increase in math performance of our African American students and the African American students at the state level and their peers at the state level. We've had an increase in in performance. Our gap still remains very large, though, between our white students and our African-American students and our white students and our Hispanic students. And that's something that, again, is, like Leslie said, there's some we can dig in, we can see who the students are, we can see some specific areas, especially in math, the domains are easier to pull apart and to support students. Because this is, again, when they leave the district and they go into college and career readiness, they need to be able to have the skills. And if we go on to the 10th grade, which is the next slide. There we go.
All right, guys, my clicker.
Yeah, there we go. You're fine. You're totally fine. So as we move into 10th grade, though, the gap begins to become bigger than the states. And so again, we want to be really focused on how our students are performing compared to our white students, because if our white students are performing very well and our Asian students are performing very well, we are reaching them with skills that we are not reaching other populations with. And we've got to identify that, and we've got to do some very intentional intervention so that it's not just about passing or graduating, but it's about what do they leave here with? What skills do they leave the district with? And go ahead, Jake.
The increase for African-American students, right, of 28% meeting and exceeding in 2019 to 50% meeting and exceeding in 22 is significant. Right?
Significant,
Not
sorry.
Yeah.
undersell that celebration.
Yes, I think that's a good one to celebrate.
I just was stuck in my page, but no. And again, we had an increase in 3 through 8 as well. So we are seeing increases.
And I think the thing to acknowledge, right, is how wide the gap was. Like to see it narrow that significantly and to have it still be wider than the state gap means there's a lot of work to do.
So we're going to just quickly look at science. So our science results. So again, this first set of science results is very specific to the state and Brookline compared. So if you look at the state at 5th and 8th grade in 19, now I'll remind you, they did not use the 19 scores at 10th grade because that was a completely different test that is no longer, that's the legacy test. We are no longer using it. In 22, we are using the new test, the next generation test. So there won't be any comparison data for grade 10, except for our performance versus the state. And as you can see, we outperform the state for all students at grade 10. One of the things to look at is we've had pretty much a similar, we've decreased our gap since 2019 to 22. So you can see that our science performance is actually flat in grades 5 and 8 for this year, but that's actually a really good sign because it means that students continue to hold on to the science gains that they were making before. So as the state shows a slight decrease overall, our students fared better. And then again, we'll pull out the race and ethnicity. So one of the things that's definitely on our radar is, and this is one of our first areas this happens, our African-American students, not only did they decrease in performance, but they fell significantly below the state. And this is grade 5. So we have to look at our access to curriculum in especially in grade 5, because grade 5 includes science from grades 3, 4, and 5. It is not a one-year test. The other thing, so that made our gap very wide. And then our gap for our performance for other students increased and is above the state for our subgroups. And that's something to celebrate, but our gap again is either at the state level or wider. So Jen, I saw your hand up, sorry.
No, I was thinking at the last slide, and we were talking about 10th grade, and there was
Uh-huh.
a strict down the bottom. We were talking about physics and biology. And
Yep.
I was just wondering how the 9th grade, where does the 9th grade MCAS data show up in this for physics?
Yeah.
Like,
So-
Go ahead, Gabe. Yeah.
Yeah, so the state always calls it 10th grade, even if students take in our case, the physics exam in 9th grade. It's just like a intricacy of how the state counts it, because they assume 10th graders are taking MCAS and we have 9th graders take it.
okay, can we just go back to that slide for
Sure.
one, second, the one before, just, okay, thank you.
If we can just go back one. There we go.
Okay,
So correct. And so the other thing is we couldn't look at the difference in 10th grade data because we don't have the difference between the 2019 test was the legacy test.
Right.
So we'll
And
have that next year.
okay.
And there are some-
What are the numbers? This is
Oh.
grade 5 still. I don't know if we need to, can we go back one slide for a
We
second?
have grade 8 coming up, but yeah, sure. So this is
Whoops.
Leslie, can you,
Jem, which slide are you looking for?
I'm
Yeah.
looking, no, we're the other way.
Go back.
I was looking for the one that had the 10th grade science on it so that I could.
Oh, the very first science.
There we go. Yeah, oh, no, no,
Next
there we
one.
go,
Yep,
right
right
there,
here.
63. Okay.
Yep.
63.
So we're ahead of the state.
State
We
is
just,
47. Okay, I was just
Correct.
looking for how could we understand that data? I'm good. Go back.
yep,
where-
and I can send you that data by performance by subgroup that I can pull.
and that's a good example of something that's on the state profile. So it's all publicly viewable for every test in every grade.
That's perfect. I just wanted to look at it real quick. Thank you. Please
Yep.
go back to where you were. Thank you.
Okay, so let me get to 10th grade, just let me get to, yes, 8th grade. Sorry, so just looking at our 8th grade, again, it demonstrates that we've got some work to do. Our students' performance in our African-American group did increase where the state stayed flat. So that is a good sign for us. However, there's still room for growth because our overall aggregate data was significantly higher than the results for our students by race. So we're going to move on because I think this is, all right. So I just want to talk about student growth. So student growth, I just want to be really clear. In order to calculate student growth, you need 3 years of data. We were tested in 2019. In 2020, there was no data. In 2021, they did not actually create growth percentiles because they didn't have anything that was comparable. So they did create growth percentiles this year using the 2019 data, the 2018 data. But again, we're going to go with starting today as our baseline. And so our growth percentiles, and again, that's how well do our students do compared to other students that scored the same way in the past. So it essentially says, the bottom line question is the school district influencing the students in their growth? So if we look at the next slide, what we're going to see is we are that big blue dot. So one of the things that we benefited from in this case was urban districts who did not do as well. And the reason that is if our students scored on average 580, and so that whatever as a scaled score, that's actually not a good score to look at. But if we had a 580 and we had a handful of students at 580 for years, those students are compared to students in other districts who scored a 580. What happened and the reason I call out the urban districts is this is where the data shows is that their students that scored at 580 before did not score at 580 this year. That means that our students continued to grow and those students didn't grow at the same rate. So it definitely supported our growth percentiles.
And I think this is a good example of something that we said right at the beginning is like, if statewide scores dropped significantly, but we held steady, the comparison makes us look good, right? So I think what probably makes the most sense, and this is why we didn't dwell on it a ton, is to not dwell too much on student growth percentile for the next couple of years. Use this year as a new baseline And next year and the year after, we can start looking at student growth percentiles a little more thoughtfully.
And this is our ELA percentile, but if you go to the next slide, our math looks pretty much the same. So again, there are things to celebrate here. Brookline students fared well throughout the pandemic compared to their peers. The gaps that existed before, some of them might be larger now. But I think what we have now is the ability to address some of it more specifically. And I think that's just because we've been able to think this through with a lot of people in the district. And what we're going to do is I'm going to pass it off to Gabe to talk about the last set of data, which is the attendance data. And then before I go, and then I'll answer Suzanne's question before I go, but then we'll be back at the end to sort of all three of us answer questions. But just so you know, like that there are celebrations here, but there are also things that we really need to address. Suzanne.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Michelle, do they do student growth by ethnic groups, races, by race, or no, they only do that in the aggregate for everybody, right? Okay.
And then individual students will get a student growth score.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Individuals.
they
Yep.
do, but they don't combine them with scores. I mean, I always thought student growth was really an important measurement, more so even than
It
some of the
is.
results.
I think actually you know what, while Gabe is presenting, I'm gonna see if I can just so you have it, we don't have to go over it today, but I think I'm gonna see how far I can disaggregate that.
And that, I have a hunch that was one of the things Erin calculated for us while she was here. It's not readily available from DESE.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll be back when we get to the question and answer part, I'll tell you what we could get a hold of and what we can't.
That's good.
So I'm gonna pass this to Gabe.
And I do just want to be mindful of time because we have another presentation and it's almost 5:15.
Yep.
So.
So attendance is part of this because we'll see some of the connection between student absenteeism and MCAS results. So it's part of why we're linking it here, and the state did as well. And so this first slide here really is straight from DESE again. So student absenteeism across the state remains a challenge for recovery efforts. And I think there's some aspect of this that is just sort of basic logic, right? If students are not in school, they're not accessing education. And as we know from broader research, right, students have varied levels of school dependency. So a student who has a lot of support at home or has access to a lot of supports at home may be less impacted by attendance, but a student who is really dependent on the school for instruction as well as all the other things the school offers may be more impacted, right? We won't get to that level of detail exactly. But a really obvious pattern from the state is that students have simply attended less school over the past years. And this could be any number of reasons, right? Impacts of remote schooling, impacts of COVID, impacts of all the other precautions where we said you have a sniffle, right? Stay home for a couple days. There's simply changes in attendance patterns. But there's some really pretty glaring and alarming things, right? So if we look at those first couple bullets here, right, the average student missed 11 days in 2021 and 15 days in 2022. The average student statewide. Also statewide, right, 18% of all students missed 18 plus days in 2021 and 28% of students missed 18 plus days in 2022. And 10%, 18 days is 10%. That's typically the chronic absenteeism rate. And so that's a huge jump, first of all, but those are pretty high numbers. And we'll show you some Brookline numbers and we can kind of see how we compare with that. And so that's part of why we previewed the idea of chronic absenteeism was not counted into our state determination this year, or this last year, but it will be for the current school year. And so we're making some significant work out of making sure kids attend school, right? And making sure we're establishing protocols for kids who are absent. And again, that 10% of days, right, 18 days, that could be 2 days a month here and there spread out. That could be a couple long stretches where students are missing 6, 7, 8, 9 days together in a row. And of course, we know that there are students who are missing significantly more school than that, right? That's 18 plus days. So some students who are missing 20, 30, 40 days of school and more. So chronic absenteeism for students increased significantly. And then this stat is just a little bit mind-blowing, right? 1.7 million days of missed school because of positive COVID-19 cases in 2022 for the state. So that's not other precautions, right? That's just positive COVID-19 cases. So it's a significant impact. Can we go to the next slide, please? So there's a lot on this slide, but I think the pattern of what's going on here becomes clear pretty quickly. So what we have here is comparing the school year 21, right, with the school year 22. So last year and the year before, right? Last year is in orange, the year before is in blue. And we can see how our attendance rate changed. So if we just start in the first row for all students, right, we can see that we had about a 97% attendance rate for all students. That dropped to a 94% attendance rate. So that's like percentage of school days kids are attending, right? 100% attendance rate would literally mean all kids are attending every day. Average number of absences goes from 4.4 per student to 10.5 per student. So that jumps over doubles, right? And then the percentage of students who are absent greater than or equal to 10 days goes from 11.1% to 40%, 40.3%, right? So almost a quadrupling of the number of students who are absent 10 days or more. And 10 days or more is kind of the preliminary, like you're on your way to that 10% number. And then you can see kind of all the way down, right? So students with disabilities have historically been absent more than our district average. Last year, they were also absent more than our district average. African American and Black students absent more than our district average and increased substantially, right? And we can kind of take it all the way down. And really the key is that last year, a lot more kids were missing more school. I think the fact that our MCAS numbers stayed as consistent as they are is perhaps a testament to our community and our ability to get kids back on track after missing a bunch of school. But at the same time, we got to make sure students are in school. And so Matt Dubois, as part of the student services team, has been doing a lot of work to like refresh our attendance practices and making sure we're kind of doing all of the steps and notifying parents and doing all of that piece and reinforcing the importance of school. Because one of the things we've sort of seen is there's been a little bit of a cultural shift of when to come to school and when to stay in school. And kind of, do I come to school if I have a sniffle? Do I come to school with a mask and just attend school? Like if I'm testing negative for COVID, right? Versus, oh, I have to stay home. I'm going to stay home for 3 or 4 days, right? And so there's a lot to do there, but we are not immune to the increased absenteeism that the state has seen. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is kind of back to statewide data. DESE prepared this for the state. We have not prepared this for ourselves, but the difference in MCAS performance for students who are chronically absent versus students who are not chronically absent is staggering. And so it's just so obvious, right? The gaps are so wide that we want to make sure students are in school. And so again, I'm kind of bleeding over into our what's next here, but really we've tried to hit the ground running from day one. One of the things that Matt was able to highlight for the high school is like he was able to say like our rising 9th graders have been chronically absent at a much higher rate. And so that he was able to do that work in the summer so that the high school was able to figure out who those kids were and kind of target work to support them in school attendance really from day one. And even before day one, there were some departments and programs that did home visits before day one over the summer. And so we don't have the like current absenteeism data on hand for today because this is mostly an MCAS report. But I do know that folks are watching it really closely. So we have some considerations here, right? And this is kind of how we want to blanket some of all of this MCAS work, right? So the last 2.5 school years have certainly not been normal. We've had plenty of discussion about how they've not been normal. And even last year, as much as we hoped it would be normal, was significantly disrupted with Omicron and the number of student absences, right? And staff absences, frankly. And so our day-to-day school life was really disrupted. And so the hope is that last year, right, was basically a full school year, even though we had some higher level of absenteeism. And it was a first full MCAS exam in a couple of years. And so we want to use that as a new baseline. And so as we consider the interventions we're putting in place this year and the work we're doing this year, hopefully we'll see some more positive results, right? Hopefully we'll see improvements in student attendance, and by being present for more instruction, we'll see better results as well as all the other pieces we have. So if we can go to the next slide, Michelle and I will kind of tag team this, including with Leslie. So how we're addressing the results. So one of the key things, and Leslie referred to our Title I funding. So because of our relatively low percentage of low-income students in the district, our Title I funding needs to be used for targeted support, and instead of school-wide programming, right? That's the technicality of how the grant works. And so with that, we've been able to use our schools. So our 3 schools that are above the district average for a poverty rate are the high school, Lincoln, and Ruffin Ridley. And so we're working with folks from each of those schools to design and develop targeted supports that use Title I funding. And these are a range. We're actually still working on getting the grant approved. They've had some hiccups with us, saying some of our stuff is school-wide. But one example is that we're working to get the M7 bus passes that don't have to be reloaded with money. We're working on getting those for students who live in Egmont and Trustman, because it's a little bit harder to get to school for them, right? They can't just walk to school in the same way. And if school, sometimes there are hiccups with, like, if I don't have cash on hand to reload the pass, maybe I don't go to school that day because I don't want to walk 40 minutes and miss 2 periods and all of that business, right? So hopefully the M7 will just help ease that and allow kids to get to school, which is a little different than like a student who maybe lives in High Street and can just walk to school. In addition to that, though, we're working on a number of different academic programs to support students with in-school and after-school support through tutoring and through other interventions that we're working on. I mentioned already that Matt and the student services team are working a lot on attendance practices. So he's worked with principals, vice principals, deans, curriculum coordinators at the high school to really just make sure the practices are tighter and that we're being more responsive when students are missing school. Yeah, I'll let Leslie and Michelle talk about the other CST and literacy.
Yeah, I can definitely jump in. I mean, I think one of the ways that we're really working to mitigate disproportionality is through CST, our child study teams. And that's no different for this work. That is the work that allows us to really think about a student individually, think about what their very specific needs are, and think about what are the interventions that can support the root cause or the root issue, and then follow up on data to see how our interventions are taking hold or not, and then make changes towards continuous improvement. So that work continues. We're really excited to see the first round of MClass data. The completion rates are looking phenomenal. So I just want to shout out all our educators. I know this was different. It was a heavy lift. Anytime you're learning something new, it's going to be a lift, and the teachers really responded and are getting it done. So by next Monday, actually, we'll have the data. And then on Tuesday, we're using faculty meeting time at every school to go through the K-2 assessment data with all of our K-2 teachers. And that's going to be facilitated by our literacy specialists and coaches. And they were here in the building at Town Hall with us today preparing for that. So we're really excited about that. The middle school review, that's going to tell us some ways that we can potentially make our middle school model more efficient. What are the recommendations? What are the commendations? And reimagining ninth grade. So that's the work at the high school that Anthony and I have been talking with the high school about. What are the supports that they need to think about what are the ways that we can make sure that all students are supported, that all students have access to the same curriculum, supports, et cetera. And so that work is just now beginning. And really that work is sitting with educators as we want to hear from them. What are the challenges that they need the most support with? And then just ongoing SEL initiatives. I know that Matt Dubois has talked to this group many times, thinking about attendance, looking at our panorama data. All those things play a part. So I think, there's not just one way to mitigate the issue. We are going to have to really look at a number of things. But I think the good news is those practices and this thinking is in place. And some of it has been in place for some time. And so, we need to follow through on that. Michelle, I don't know if there's anything.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. And just to say that, like, these are all attached to all the initiatives that we're just not doing it. We're not looking at things separately. We're looking at all the initiatives. Just one follow-up. I have pulled all the reports for SGP for you by subgroup, and I'll send those on to Robin and she can distribute them.
And, one thing I was remiss that I wanted to say is that, there are particular schools that have really honed in on action planning around individual students, really getting to know the student, making sure that they have a safe and trusted adult at the school, knowing what the problem of practice is, and again, focusing on that with a laser-like focus. And we are seeing tremendous growth in those cases. So I think that is one of the ways that, or one of the things we want to look into further, and one of the best practices that we want to share amongst the schools. So we already see some practices that are having really high yield, and we want to continue that. So I think that I didn't want to go without saying that.
Now we see the questions. Jen, are you going to call on people, or you want us to?
I think we can just sort of open it up, but I do just really want to be mindful. We have a whole nother presentation. It's 5:26. And so if we can just really be very kind of targeted with our questions at this point. We've asked a lot kind of going all the way through. So, go. I see Suzanne, I see Helen, if you want to just go.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. This is for a much longer, later discussion, and I really appreciate all we went through today. My head's just kind of spinning because there's a lot there, and I did preview it before we came, so I still feel there's a lot there. But I'm just wondering, at your kind of that last slide where we're talking about addressing results, I don't see anything that's particular to our Black and Brown students, and is that something we need to be doing? I don't know what that would be, but just a recognition, that in fact, that those are two targeted groups that we are really struggling to get them where we think they need to be. Again, I'm not focusing on MCAS so much, but on Michelle's question of, do they have the skills they need to have to be successful after they graduate from the high school? So anyway, I'm not looking for an answer right now, but I'm just bringing that up, that, maybe there should be some real thought about targeting those groups of students, and are we meeting their needs? So thank you.
And we've been thinking about that. And again, that is one of the ways that we are really using the Title I funds. So maybe at a later time, we can go into specifics about that. But I think it's one spoke on the wheel, because there's the instructional piece and instructional access. That's the work we do with our educators around anti-bias. It's the work we do with our educators around differentiating their instruction. This really feeds into the reimagining ninth grade, and thinking about what is the experience of Black and Brown students, at the high school. And this leads into the recommendation process. So I think there's a lot of pieces that will kind of culminate to hopefully get us the result that we want. But yes, we are thinking a lot about that.
And Leslie, just to tag on to that, I think it's really important to think about the fact that, and I think you started to get it, is that it highlights a tier 1 instructional issue in general. And so access means, while I'm sitting, to us, I think, while I'm sitting in the classroom, do I have access to the content? Do I have access to what's being shared? And do I have an entry point to understand the content? And so as Leslie was saying that, I was thinking, like, it doesn't show up specifically, because what we have to do is go back and see what's happening in the classroom that does or does not give access to students. And Leslie also pulled out the idea about the specific, that we're seeing different results at schools that have some specific supports in place for students at the tier 1 level. And as we were looking at M-class data today with the literacy specialists, like, it was actually really exciting for them to say, oh, I see this issue and this actually shows up in our tier 1 instruction, but maybe we need to point that out and help teachers understand where. So it's not about specific intervention, but maybe thinking more about our tier 1 and what we're doing every day in the classroom.
Helen?
Well, thank you for this presentation. I know it's a lot of work and there's always, 20 million questions from us. And there are just 2 observations I had. One, that I'm not that surprised that we had, pandemic loss. We probably didn't have as much as others, but we had it. And, it affected everybody. The one thing that was really as surprising to me is 7th grade in both ELA and in math did better than in 2019. What happened there and why? And maybe it's just the class, sometimes we have a particularly bright class that just shines, or I don't know, but it's just interesting that in both areas they did well.
Yeah, we noted that and haven't had a chance to dig any deeper at this point.
Yeah, thank you. That was my 2 comments, but congratulations to the 7th grade teachers and all the ones that came before them, because it didn't just happen in 7th grade.
Stephen?
Thanks, Jennifer. So I just want to make a couple of brief observations. First, I just want to say thank you again. I know you were doing this without Erin there anymore, and you pulled together a huge amount of information and presented it really comprehensively and really coherently. Thank you. And it's a tough topic too. So thank you for not shying away from any of the difficult stuff in here. A couple of comments. One, I know that SES, for whatever reasons, is in Brookline actually not a very significant predictor of academic achievement as measured by the MCAS, relative to most other districts. At the same time, though, I think on future versions of a report like this, it would be really useful to see if we can control for SES in a report like this, so that we could further isolate the extent to which these issues have to do with structural racism or something related to structural racism.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Stephen, I
Michelle.
just want to, the only reason I want to jump in, and I was just looking for my piles of data. I think one thing to note is I actually took a look at that as a way to report, and it's not consistent from grade level to grade level in terms of the number of students in order to create the subgroup to give us the data. So we can pull it for you, but it may not be consistent that we have a comparison at every grade level.
Okay. Okay.
It was sort of an intentional decision based on our numbers.
I guess for me, it would further clarify what the core problem is that we need to address.
Mhm.
And that then when we look at the last slide, which is really the crux of this presentation, which is what is the main problem and what are we going to do about it, we could really focus in on what that main problem is and make sure that our strategies are aligned with what we agree the main problems are. That's the first observation. The second observation was, it seems, thank you again for quantifying so clearly what the learning loss has been, as the MCAS, as Suzanne is always reminding us rightly, I think, is a very imperfect predictor of, but it seems like we were pretty in line with the state's learning loss, except for Latinx students, it looked like. It looked like and this is not a case of a small n, right? Just looking at the numbers, we have about 500 to 500 kids per grade. We have about 11% Latinx students. So that's about 60 kids per MCAS measured grade. So that's not an amount that would suggest a high level of volatility over a 3-year period, especially compared with Black students, which had a much smaller level of volatility. So that was a concern. And I'm curious to know if there are any anecdotal or qualitative report. Again, I know you guys are stretched totally thin. Like that, it's not like you'll just send out your research to gather further anecdotal evidence about what is driving this. But this is the sort of thing that I would love
Yeah.
for us to be able to follow up on to see if there are any additional drivers of this specific gap.
I think it's a good, I'm going to jump in because it's consistent. Like pre-pandemic, like the 2016 MCAS report, the 2017 MCAS report, the difference between like white and Asian students, Latinx students, and Black students is relatively static. And so it's a group that's held sort of steady, hasn't improved as maybe much as we like, but hasn't dipped to the levels that we see.
I recall that being a little bit different for the gap between white and Black students pre-pandemic. I remember that trend worsening significantly over the 3 years prior to the pandemic, but I don't remember that being the case for white and Latinx students. So that just jumped out at me as something that perhaps it was an aberration, but perhaps there's something there. And just the third and final observation I just wanted to make was that this to me reinforces, and this is partly, Suzanne, a response to what you were saying, is this just, I think, needs to stiffen our resolve on the school committee to further support and expand the Office of Educational Equity. I think I went to the second meeting of CARE last night that Janae is convening, and they have 3 goals, and they only have a small number of people addressing those goals. I know there's a second person in there, but if we have a continual, persistent, pernicious issue here, which is worse than elsewhere in the state, I know it's unreasonable to have hoped that we would have made significant progress during a pandemic in addressing it, but now we're out of that. Hopefully out of the worst of that pandemic. It's absolutely urgent that we make progress now, and this is the measurement that we need to determine whether we're doing what we are obligated to do. And the ways I think the school committee can affect that is to continue to support that office and making sure that it's well funded and that its activities are on target. So those are the points I wanted to make. I know those aren't so much questions. I just wanted to say my piece.
I was just going to say, because I know we're time sensitive today, but I am happy. A lot of what you're asking for data wise is actually is easy to pull because they provide us a tool to do it. So if there are things you want to know, send us an email and we can get that to you.
I will, but I would like you to make it the last priority.
No, I totally.
Okay.
I appreciate that, but that's not a huge lift.
Okay, thanks, Michelle.
Okay, so we are at, is it Helen, urgent
Well,
question?
it's not a question. Well, it's sort of just another point to Stephen. One of the things we know is we have a huge churn rate. And I'm wondering if that increased during COVID or decreased during COVID, and whether that has, how many years has the student been with us, and, how they score in terms of needs improvement, or, because we're trying to measure what we do, not necessarily what the student comes in with. So if it's a first year student who's taking it, would it be any different? Just as another factor that makes your life more difficult. Sorry. Thank you.
All right, so I think hearing the conversation, I think it'd be great if at a future meeting, we can kind of come back and see more about addressing results and the tier 1 supports and that you were talking about, and some of the ideas that we might be able to share from school to school and district wide about how we can really make some progress on this body of work. So I think that, we'll continue to look at those. I know we'll be having, middle school review conversations, upcoming CST conversations coming up. So, we can certainly intertwine, keeping this thread of this important body of work and making sure that we're meeting the needs of all students and continue those conversations. I do want to, unless there are any other urgent comments or questions, do want to move us forward. We do have an important item tonight. It's initial discussion, so we don't anticipate that we are going to have all the questions and answers today. It's an initial conversation for us to get some information and understand some perspective. Suzanne, did you have a question?
Well, just before we go, I'm sorry, Carly. I don't know what needs to be shared with the whole school committee, but some of this I think would be really important, and to have the conversation with the public about it. So, I'm going to just throw it back to you, Jennifer and Leslie and Michelle, and And Gabe, I don't know what that should look like because you've done so much work today, but I do think it would be really important for the whole committee to hear much of this and to be part of this conversation. So I'll leave it to you what it should look like, but I would love for that to be have a wider audience. Thanks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if I could just say, I'll be really quick. I know we really need to move on, but I think one thing I just want to say is that Brookline can really get their arms around this. We really just need to coordinate our efforts, coordinate our resources. We need to be on the same page. We need to, when we have interventions in place, we need to stick with them unless we see they're not working. And when we see they're not working, we need to make changes efficiently. So I'm just going to leave it with that there's a lot to celebrate. There's work for us to do. And if we're moving together in tandem, Brookline can get it done. So, all right. On to Intro to Adolescence. And Carlin is on the call. And so as Jen said, this is just really a preview. I know as a mom to a fifth grader, this is something I'm thinking about and thinking about, how the school that Layla attends is presenting this information to her and the work that they've done. And I know that families in the public schools of Brookline are have the same questions. And so I want to be transparent that how we framed this part of the discussion is really around sharing the history of ITA, the work that's been done in the immediate, and what we still have to do. And then just put the caveat on this by saying, this is really tricky work. This is work that has to be culturally responsive. Different cultures look at this work very differently. In a single family, how they look at it compared to their next door neighbor, it could be vastly different, wildly different. And so this work is going to take time and it's going to take thought. Carlin is definitely the right person to lead this because she's so inclusive, really getting educators, people in the community involved. So today, the essence of the presentation is just to give you a preview of those three segments. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Carlin, and let me just share my screen.
And Carlin, while she's pulling up her screen, would you introduce yourself and your role for members of the community who may not be familiar with or have met you?
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. My name is Carlin Wayne-Oyama. I'm the coordinator for wellness education K through 12 for the public schools of Brookline, which means I'm in charge of all the physical education and the health education across the district. And I'm happy to be here with you all today. And as Leslie mentioned, this is a work that is really, I'm very passionate about as the coordinator of wellness education. One of the most important things is to ensure student safety and making sure that all students feel safe in our classrooms and that we feel like we're delivering a comprehensive health education and wellness education. And so the Intro to Adolescence is part of that. I've been doing a lot of work over the last few years, of course, as a veteran health teacher in the district, having taught at both the high school and also at Lawrence. I've actually had this role as a teacher, teaching this curriculum. And now I'm really excited to do some more work with the fifth grade teachers who introduced the Intro to Adolescence. So Leslie, I think you control the perfect. So just a little history about sort of some of the ITA movement over the last few years. The last time it was fully updated was in 2004, and then there was a sort of additional revisions done in 2010. And many of you on the committee know that we use the comprehensive sex ed curriculum, the Get Real curriculum that did a 2019 update. So we sort of used that updates that we already had to the curriculum that we use in 7th and 8th grade. And we started to bring some of those updated work down to the ITA curriculum, knowing that that was the needs of our students and families and the curriculum. So in the spring of 2020, many of you know that we didn't have school, so there was no ITA that spring, but we did send a letter home to families with sort of support around resources that they could use. But we realized that, those fifth grade students still needed to have their Intro to Adolescence unit. So in 2020 and 21, we worked together with nurses and guidance and health teachers and peer leaders to update the curriculum and make sure that we could deliver it both virtually and in person because we had the RLA. And then that year, we actually made sure that every student received the intro to adolescence, including the sixth graders. So the sixth graders that had missed it in fifth grade actually got the ITA in sixth grade that year. And then we, in that spring, we also then took another look at some of the other curricular out there, and including the sixth grade Get Real and some of the 3 R's and Advocates for Youth puberty lessons. I coordinated with some of my coordinators, district coordinators, to look at other curriculum, just to make sure that we were implementing the most accurate, updated curriculum. And then we updated we implemented the digital version, and then we worked over this summer, which was really exciting. I worked with fifth grade teachers, administrators, Matt Dubois, some health teachers, to sort of look at the updated digital version and make it even more inclusive, trauma sensitive, informed, and also now we're in the vetting process of vetting it through the various district leaders, the LGBTQ+ task force, the community, and other leaders. Next slide, I think. So what is some of the work we're doing right now? We are aligning with the national health standards, just like we do with our health curriculum in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. We're talking about skills-based and making sure students are learning communication skills and advocacy skills, and really truly trying to align with our national health standards, which we already do in the 7th and 8th grade and 9th grade level. We're talking about personal boundaries. We added a piece about communication around your boundaries and around consent, making sure that we keep it very developmentally appropriate for 5th graders. We updated the pedagogy and the materials to be more inclusive, very similar to what we did with the 2019 updates from Get Real. So instead of saying a female anatomy, we do bodies with vaginas. That's an example of how we use more inclusive diagrams, materials, and pedagogy. We looked at trauma-sensitive and harm-reducing approaches to how do we expand the curriculum to make sure that we're including all identities and acknowledging the diversity that exists in our school system and in our families and in our students along a spectrum. And next slide. And so what are we doing now? What are our next steps? Well, currently we're vetting this curriculum that we updated even again this summer. And it's really important for me to mention that we've had a lot of student voice in this. I've met with students at the high school. we met with 5th grade students that actually had the digital version this past spring. We've had a lot of student feedback and voice, which has been great. So this is really, truly something that I value, is making sure we have students, teachers, families, various people in vetting this curriculum. So we're connecting with organizations to vet it, experts in the field, outside of the district to vet the curriculum. And then we're also having our partnerships. I worked last year a lot with the DESE Safe Schools. And so we're going to continue those partnerships. We're vetting every lesson or every topic through the task force. And then we're also using assessment tools, analysis tools, to make sure that we are using, comprehensive approaches. So what are some of the things we're going to do this year? We're going to have a release day for the 5th grade teachers to make sure that we're supporting them in implementing. This is not new for them. I want to make sure that everyone knows that they have been implementing this ITA, this Intro to Adolescence, but we know that it's really important to give teachers and everyone support in making sure that they implement curriculum that they feel very comfortable with, that they can answer questions appropriately. They've had opportunities to ask their own questions and be really, really supported in this work. And that's something that is really important for us to make sure we do. So with that, we're going to continue with our partnership with Safe Schools. We're going to update the resource list and the classroom materials to make sure we're using our updated versions of some of the texts that we already use. For instance, We use some of our resources where it's so amazing or perfectly normal. There are updated versions of those now. So making sure that we are vetting and updating those resource lists. The last piece is that I'm planning on giving an informational webinar to parents and caregivers along with some fifth grade teachers and possibly some health educators, very similar to what we did with the sex education webinar over the last 2 years. We started doing district webinars where we introduced the sex ed curriculum in 7th and 8th grade. And we found that to be really proactive in getting lots of questions and answering questions and making sure that parents and families and caregivers feel really comfortable with the curriculum and have opportunities to ask questions and come in and meet with their teacher if they need to, and develop scaffolds if they need scaffolds for their students. But that's a really important part of what we are planning on doing. And I think, Leslie, if I'm correct, that might be it. It was pretty fast, right? That's fast for Carlin. So I'll take questions or.
I guess I'm wondering how when you're going through the new materials, the updated materials, how much do they differ from what we have been teaching? Like how much have the materials changed, the curriculum materials themselves? And in what areas do you think are the biggest pieces of change that we might want to be aware of, or communities members might want to be aware of?
It's a great question, Jennifer. I would say probably the biggest changes were in some of the language and some of the ways we talk about gender and the ways we talk about identity, the ways we talk about anatomy and physiology. So a lot of that is changed. It's aligned with what we're doing in 7th and 8th grade already, but for families and or students, that might feel new to them. So I think it's topic 3 in the curriculum, and then topic 5 are those 2 topics that we are talking about. So I would say that, Jennifer, that those are places where we're probably going to need, and that's, I think I kind of outlined them in the work underway, that those are places that where I think we need to have lots of conversations and extra opportunities for people to ask questions, voice concerns, as Leslie mentioned, culturally responsive, like teaching is really important. And we have to make sure that we are inviting all cultures to come in and give us their thoughts and their, opportunities to sort of unpack that. Because we are going to talk about inclusive identity curriculum and comprehensive health curriculum. So that's going to be part of what we do. So we want to make sure we give opportunities for families to ask questions and put in scaffolds in place that they might need.
I just wanted to also say that in part of that what you're in relation to the comments that you're saying now and your presentation, I think it's great, the idea of a webinar so that families can understand more about the curriculum. And I also saw in there early notification so that caregivers and teachers can have conversations about what their comfort level is or what they want. And it's a little bit fresh for me because we had a policy subcommittee meeting yesterday where we were looking at parental notification, our school committee policy on that. So it's very timely. And our policy does match Mass General Law. So, we looking at that and sort of keeping that in mind, especially if we're making, changes to the curriculum and updating it so people are, informed. That's great. So I like that that's on the slide already. Thank you.
The notification will be earlier and give families opportunities to meet with the classroom teacher and talk about opt-outs and what that might look like.
And if I could just jump in, I see the major bodies of work is twofold. And one is Carlin and her team are doing a lot of work to update the curriculum so that it is accurate, responsive, correct. And we need that vetted. And so it needs to be aligned with effective practices and research. And so that's taking time. We're actually going to be meeting with a few folks who we think can help us, because I think it's important to have someone who is not biased, who really sees this work on a national level to give us feedback. So I think that's one of the big things we really need to tackle. And then the second piece is the teacher's level of comfort with the changes and the information. You don't want to botch this up. And so, you know, we know that there are some struggles with professional development time and teachers. And so we're really working hard to get 5th grade a release day for this. And we're going to have to think of subsequent opportunities throughout the summer and going into next year. It's going to need to be ongoing. We're going to have to always think about this when new teachers join the public schools of Brookline who are going to be teaching this curriculum. So those are the two biggest things I think we need to really keep our eye on, is the vetting and then the professional development that we're providing to teachers who are actually going to carry it out.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Carlin. Suzanne and Helen, I keep calling in that order because that's how you popped up on my screen. So I hope that's okay.
I had a few questions just about kind of the context of it. So it's the classroom teachers who are going to teach this. And do they do it as part of a science or part of an advisory or part of just they stick it in where they can in the day? And like, how much time does this take? You know, I mean, how many, does it go on for a couple of weeks, or it's a all year thing, or what is it?
A great question, Suzanne. So it's generally done in the spring, in the May-June timeframe. And in the topics, sometimes I think it's about 1 to 2 lessons per topic, because it is taught by the classroom teacher, right? They've already done a lot of the building community and establishing norms and a safe sort of classroom environment, that sort of advisory model, if you will. They've already done because they've been with the kids all year. So it is implemented by the 5th grade classroom teacher, May-June timeframe. It can go a couple of weeks. Some of the teachers say it can be, a few weeks, depending on how much time they implement it. But it is considered, because they do a lot about hormones and puberty and changes in the body. There are some science context there, but there's also a lot of SEL. So it's really a comprehensive unit integrating many different curricular areas, if you will. I don't know.
And then what about those students who opt or parents opt them out? What do they do during that time?
Yeah, so just like in the 7th and 8th grade and 9th grade, any student, first of all, it needs to be said that any student that opts out or family that opts the student out, they will not be penalized for being opt out. It'll be done in a very supportive way. Like we work with students and families to make sure that it's not, someone feeling that they're not there. And so we work with the students and families to make sure it's very responsive to the family, and there's no, there's nothing, their grade doesn't go down, nothing like that. So that's really important to hear. And for the 7th and 8th grade, we have sort of alternative activities for them, because in 7th and 8th grade, they only see their teacher twice a week. For the 5th grade, I'm going to be working with the 5th grade teachers to maybe design something that the students could do when they're opting out, because that's something that we have to work on to make sure that we support those families. Where do they go? Where are they during that time?
Yeah, thank you. I was just curious. Yeah.
Hi, Helen.
Hi, Carolyn. This is great, and thank you for doing this. I guess I'm still back, I think, in season 2, because last I remembered, we were trying to get health and wellness into 6th grade. And did we miss something? Maybe I missed it along the way, and I didn't.
Leslie, you want to take that one?
That's still the question of the day, Helen. You didn't miss anything.
You didn't miss anything.
Okay.
We want wellness in 6th grade, Alan.
But we brought it into 5th grade.
No, it's always, no, the puberty lesson, the intro to adolescence has always been in 5th grade. We wanted to.
Not in 4th grade.
Correct. 5th grade. It's always been in 5th grade, since at least the binder I have was from 1999. So I know that it was at least here since 1999. And I think, Suzanne, to your point, it used to be under the K-8 science coordinator, used to sort of spearhead that work. And then the district and myself, we came together realizing that this work really aligns with what I'm already doing in 7th and 8th and 9th grade. So yes, we hope to close that gap in 6th grade, Helen. That has been identified as a gap by every committee that I've seen, every person that I've talked to, every group.
But
So
we haven't done that piece.
we haven't.
No, we haven't. And we thought about it a lot last year, but then with the onset of the middle school review, we put a pause on it because I think that gap really has a lot to do with how we're thinking about sixth grade, because that's what sets it apart from seventh and eighth grade is the difference in world language and the difference in the amount of health well, they don't get health. The fact they don't get health in sixth grade. So yes, we are still thinking about that, and we're looking into
It
it.
might be helpful since there's so many new members on the committee, the scope and sequence. I think I remember a grid that you had shared with us at one time of the scope and sequence for the years to give to the rest of the committee so that they're aware of what we are teaching and what we're not, I guess. But that's
I think we mentioned this at the first subcommittee or maybe the last one of last year. The coordinators have all revised their curriculum overviews, which provides a nice high level summary of everything we do at every grade level, K through 8.
that would be great to get that too, if we could.
Are those posted on the website, right?
They are.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think the new scope and sequence are out, but to your point, Helen, I think it is helpful to sort of see the continuum of what we offer 5 through 12. And I'm hoping that we'll continue to have more conversations as part of the middle school review, so that we can sort of see how those things are continuing, so that we have, what are the things that spiral within the curriculum, what are new topics at each grade level. There may be some potential we can at a future meeting sort of spend some time looking at that scope and sequence, and hopefully we'll have some recommendations or just reflections from the middle school review process that can help us see how we can have that equitable access across all the schools and all of the grade levels. That's my hope. So do others have questions specifically about the ITA curriculum, the Introduction to Adolescence curriculum, or any other questions on this agenda item? Nice, it's 6:01. Woo! Go team. That's wonderful. I do think we have technically, I want to just double check. I do have new business. We have new business listed on the agenda. So I want to open it up before we close. Does anyone have any new agenda items or new topics of new business?
Well, can I put my perennial thing in? As
Sure.
long as we have Carlin here. I would like kids to know how to swim before they graduate. That's it.
Helen, I love that. I agree. I also agree with
it's a
sixth grade
life
health.
skill that is critical for kids. And I don't know how many kids graduate the high school not knowing, but it would be nice to think about that as a high school
We
requirement.
do have a fabulous elective program at the high school, which we offer swimming and advanced swimming and lifeguarding. So I encourage folks to continue to consider that in when supporting their students in their elective selections for their health and wellness as well.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer. We have a wonderful relationship with the pool, and I plan on expanding it. And we're very happy that we can offer that to our public schools of Brookline students. You can get your lifeguarding, certification at the high school as
All
part.
3 of my children made summer jobs that way.
It's excellent. We're so lucky to have such a fantastic program in the public schools of Brookline and offer our students so much. And we'll continue to look at ways to expand that, I hope. So just sort of recapping I will touch base. I will make sure to get to the chair that we have sent an approval at the subcommittee level for the trip to Italy. And I will work with Leslie and the chair and Dr. Guillory to sort of see what the next level MCAS presentation might be to the full committee, what kind of information. As well as coming back and revisiting in the future, addressing results at a future meeting of how we can make progress on gaps that we're seeing in academic achievement, and hopefully coming back to revisit at least maybe a portion of the meeting, a continuum of our health and wellness curriculum I see Stephen, did you have something to add?
Could I just ask one more question? Sorry, this is getting back to an
Before
earlier,
Stephen, yes, you can. I'm just kidding.
just getting back to an earlier point. Leslie, you made a comment in passing about the anti-bias work that that OTL is doing. Did that include a review of any particular curriculum for existing biases in the curriculum? I know it's been discussed a lot. I'm not aware of the current status of it. And I'm really curious to know what is the ongoing status of those kinds of activities.
Yes, so we have the high school social studies curriculum review that is being done by the New Teacher Center and is funded through the METCO grant that started last year, but it was kind of hard to get it underway. We really used last year just to inform educators about the work and, be clear about, what their role was in that work. And so that's underway now, and we expect that to be done in December. So
Oh,
we should
wow.
be able to come back and report on what we found. And I think
That's pretty major. I feel like
that's
people have been
huge.
talking about that since I woke up to education in Brookline.
Yeah, that's going to be huge, especially starting in social studies, because we know that's where some of those are some of the trickiest places because of the content. So yeah, we're looking forward to sharing that. That work is on schedule. And I'm hoping that that can be a model for future curriculum review, future material and curriculum reviews specifically for bias, racism, et cetera.
Thanks. That's it, Jennifer.
Ableism too, sorry.
Excellent. I want to thank everyone for coming and participating, presenting, asking great questions. Thank you all so much. It is 6:05 and that's the last word of the evening. I hope you all have a lovely night and see you all Thursday.
Mhm.
Maybe even tomorrow.